Ruin My Childhood.
Thank you for listening to Ruin My Childhood, the podcast where we decide if some things are better left in the past. I'm Mike.
And I'm Kat.
And what are we going to be talking about today, Kat?
Star Wars Episode 1.
AKA, say the whole title. Come on.
I don't know the whole title.
The Phantom Menace.
Oh, whatever.
Come on. The Skywalker saga is coming to a close with Episode 9. So we figured we'd go back and watch the movie that came out in theaters when we were kids. So this came out in 1999, so we were about 11 years old. What do you remember about this movie? Or I guess the better question would be, what do you remember about this time as this movie was coming out?
Oh, it was a simpler time. No, I mean, this was back when you didn't have as many blockbusters in theaters. You had a few big films every year that came out on Christmas and Thanksgiving, and then you had your summer blockbuster. And that was kind of this era, and this film was so anticipated. I think it was actually before we realized how impossible to please Star Wars fans are.
Well, the thing that's crazy about this particular movie was obviously this is pre-YouTube days, so the only way you could see a trailer was going to the movies. Mm-hmm. So this, I remember I had friends whose parents took them to the movies specifically to see a trailer, and then they walked out of the movie.
The pod race one?
I don't remember, the specific trailers, but definitely there were trailers. The first trailer, I had friends who went to the movies just to see the trailer and then did not watch the film.
I think I remember them actually showing the pod race scene somewhere before, and I'm not really sure why that is, or if there was just an extended trailer that had the pod race scene. I remember that specific scene was kind of how I was introduced to the film and how a lot of audiences were introduced to it, and I'm not really sure why or where.
Well, there's a lot of marketing for this film. So I vaguely remember this crossover thing, which they're the same company, but like Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut all had some sort of promotion for this where you can get like images and stuff for it by buying food there. So the boxes had images and you would like pull things off the cups and there was things on there. And this also had some huge video games around it too. The Pod Race video game on Nintendo 64 was an iconic game. So this was a big deal. And then you had Darth Maul. Like everybody wanted to see that double-ended lightsaber.
Yeah, it was really at a time when you could introduce a character and that character already has fans before the movie even premieres.
Absolutely. People were excited about that. And I remember most people were disappointed in that character ultimately, how he was handled.
I do remember that Anakin was exceptionally annoying.
Yeah, Jake Lloyd from Jingle All the Way.
Was he in Jingle All the Way?
Yeah, he's the kid in that movie.
I don't know. He's kind of like one of those child actors that just shows up, lands on his mark, whines a line, moves to another mark, and does the same thing over and over.
Yeah, he wasn't very good. And it's actually sad because that kid resigned from acting pretty much right away. Retired from acting like right away. He said this movie basically ruined his life. Like people have been mean to him ever since, and he's just a kid.
Oh no, you're so sad with all your big bank accounts.
It is kind of sad though. Like he can't go anywhere without being recognized and hated. Like people, it's not his fault.
I don't think they recognize him now.
No, people do. Like he talks about it.
Well, okay, Star Wars fans are just bitter old jerks. For one, but also he was a terrible actor. It's best that he just made his money and got out as fast as possible. This was a win for that kid.
So what's crazy is I remember this was like seeing on the news, people camped out to see this movie for days in advance. And people liked this movie initially when it came out, but very quickly, by the time the next one came out, people hated this film. So there was a lot of love. I think people wanted to like it initially, but very quickly realized how bad it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to some of our listener comments. You want to take this first one?
Jesus Rodriguez didn't really send a comment. He sent a GIF of the pod race scene.
Doing a barrel roll.
Thanks, Jesus.
Nikki Britton said, Darth Maul was underrated AF. I needed more. I needed a Darth Maul origin story.
Oh, that might have been a good movie.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. And they've tried to do more with him in like the cartoons and stuff since. Like he has like robot legs now.
So animalistic in so many ways, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he's supposed to be from like a warlike tribe or something like that. I don't know a ton about his backstory.
I mean, either way, he's very high maintenance. He's like those goth kids. He must spend hours on that makeup.
I think those are supposed to be tattoos.
They're supposed to be tattoos?
Yeah, I think it's a tattoo.
Ooh, who does his pigment?
So, his shaman. All right, well, what do you think? Should we just go watch this film?
Yeah, let's get it over with.
On a remote desert planet, 2 Jedi Knights meet a young boy.
Hi.
And forever change the fate of a galaxy. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now playing at a theater near you. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
Okay, so we just watched Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And I'm not going to say it was good, but I actually thought it was better than I thought it was going to be.
I'm just going to say it's bad.
Oh, it's not a good movie.
It's not at all.
Let's not confuse me saying it was better than I thought by saying it's a good movie.
You know, I'm just going to come right out and say it. And, you know, I might get hate for this. Star Wars fans are crazy. I'll probably get doxxed for this comment. Star Wars is kind of overrated.
You're wrong.
I'm not
You
wrong.
just like not liking things that are
That's
popular.
bullshit.
No.
No, like, what do I do that with?
Star Wars.
And? Anything else?
Yes.
It's an objectively...
Game of Thrones.
I just haven't seen Game of Thrones. I don't have time.
Rick and Morty.
It's just weird and gross.
Yeah.
And they're fun. That's the thing. They're fun. It's great if you're super into fantasy, if you like seeing these worlds come to life. But, I feel like the best actors can be made terrible in a Star Wars film.
Well, you got to go with the best actors can give a bad performance with a bad director. And George Lucas is objectively not a good director. So in the first 3 films, he directed A New Hope, the first movie. And then the second 2 movies were not directed by him. They were written by him. But even that first movie, there's a documentary called How They Edit...
Didn't Spielberg have to save it?
So Spielberg, Brian De Palma, and Coppola. Those 3, and then his wife, who was a producer, went and re-edited the film to make it make more sense. And then the second and third movie, he had other people, like Lawrence Kasdan wrote the script and directed. So he does best when people tell him... He does his best when people tell him no. And this version, or these 3 movies, he had no filter. He did everything the way he wanted to do it. The same thing with the special editions that came out in the 90s. He went through and edited all these movies and changed these films for whatever reason. So he's not the best director, and I don't blame the actors in these situations, because this was also one of the first films that was filmed like entirely on green screen.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get that there's a huge learning curve when you are not experienced working green screen, and that can be really difficult for a lot of actors. But it's the director's job to flesh that out for them and to create this world for them and make sure that they're supported in their performances. And these actors, I mean, they're so talented, and they all just turned out performances that you can tell were micromanaged.
Yeah, I'd say the person who came out best in this, and we should summarize this film eventually, but the person who came out best, I think, was Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
In this. And he was doing a very good job at kind of mimicking Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan in the original movies. Mm-hmm. I think he did a really great job. He wasn't playing Obi-Wan.
He was also a huge fan.
Well, they all were. So Liam Neeson signed onto this movie without reading the script because he really wanted to be in it.
Oh, honey.
Keira Knightley plays basically Natalie Portman's double in this film. Her parents didn't want her to do it, but she was a big Star Wars fan, and she went out for it at 12 years old. Same thing, like not seeing any scripts or anything. Like, these actors just signed on because Star Wars was a phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So I think Star Wars, and this is probably why you don't like it as much as, like, let's say me, is this was a big family thing, and it's kind of a generational thing. With the original movies coming out 30 plus years ago, it's now moved on to the next generation, and you know, people are growing up watching what their parents liked, with us like watching it in the 90s, and with these new trilogies, you know, younger kids, theoretically we could have young kids watching this film. You know, we don't have kids, but I think that maybe you not having a family aspect of this movie could be why you don't have that attachment that I do.
We all went to the movies together to watch it. It just...
Yeah, but did you guys were you guys big fans of the original trilogy and watch it all the time and have a connection to the original trilogy?
My parents liked them. They saw them when they first came out because they were popular, but my parents have taste.
That's cool. So these movies changed cinema forever.
I know.
So I think there's...
But I think you need to be able to look at them objectively.
Oh, objectively, they're not great. So
they're fun.
Yeah.
They're silly. They're goofy. They're immersive. And that is what they have to offer.
Yeah.
They turn out terrible performances from fabulous actors. The plot lines, plot holes everywhere. But
the way these plots came about were basically... George Lucas wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie but couldn't get the rights. So then he basically merged Flash Gordon and like Seven Samurai kind of films, like that generation. That's where the Jedi came from. So he mashed things together and then basically took the stereotypical like Beowulf type archetype, like that hero,
right,
and moved on. So like there isn't anything original about it, but they've always just been like technological marvels.
I do really enjoy the original trilogy. I enjoy the second and third ones from this trilogy that came out when we were in our teens and 20s. But I think objectively, this is probably my least favorite of all the Star Wars films.
So I'd say
it's the weakest. It has a boring plot. It almost saves it with the pod race scene, but it just doesn't have a lot to offer. So you want to summarize it?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. So basically, in a nutshell, Naboo, which is run by Queen Amidala, played by Natalie Portman,
who's an elected queen. Why would you call her queen?
I don't know.
Come on, George Lucas.
So they have a blockade set up by the Trade Federation, and basically Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan are supposed to kind of negotiate opening up trade back to Naboo. It turns out Senator Palpatine, which we find out it's officially him later, but Senator Palpatine is actually the Emperor, Darth Sidious. He's actually orchestrating things, trying to basically set up a war so that way he can kick out the current Supreme Chancellor and he can become Supreme Chancellor and basically run the universe. Qui-Gon Jinn's like, something's up. This seems weird. He never quite figures out what's up before dying, but he ends up getting the Queen to Tatooine, finds young Anakin, and is like, dude, this kid's pretty dope. He's really good at pod racing. He has a ton of space bacteria, which gives him superpowers.
Which is just kind of a ridiculous cop-out for Jedi powers.
So he ends up saying, hey, I'm going to trade this kid. All the Jedi Masters, Yoda, Mace Windu, are like, he's a little old, and he's a bit of a, pardon my French, but he's a bit of a bitch. He's afraid, and when you're afraid, you tend to do stupid things, which leads to the dark side. We're a little concerned he might go to the dark side, so no, we're not going to train him. He goes, deuces, I'm out. I'm going to go help Queen Amidala get her planet back. They set up like a little battle with the droids. Anakin somehow saves the day. He magically learns how to fly a star fighter jet, blows up a base on the inside. Day is saved. Darth Maul kills Qui-Gon Jinn. Obi-Wan cuts him in half, and he gets to cut off his little braid and train Jake Lloyd to be the best Anakin Skywalker he can be.
I think what I understand least about this movie is why power is instilled where it is. If these Jedis are this powerful, why are they not running everything? Instead, they're just kind of like hired hands, and they're used as secret weapons. And also, if the Jedis have this power, and I don't like that originally it seemed like your Jedi powers were something that you could build on and become more powerful with and perfect. And then in this, it's like, okay, well, you've got space germs that give you these powers, and some of you have more than others.
So, that's the base level, is having more bacteria gets you that. But there is a knowledge piece in training and finding different ways to meditate. So there is a version of leveling up. So
furthermore, with this whole training aspect, Qui-Gon Jinn has already trained his apprentice.
Obi-Wan.
Yes, I know who he is. He's already trained his apprentice. He's pretty much ready to go, I guess theoretically. He's almost ready to be on his own, which is kind of his argument for taking on Anakin. But he goes there specifically to consult with them about this, and then takes everything that they have to say and throws it out the window and is super defiant and like, well, I'm going to train him anyway, with or without your permission, so suck on that. Like, does he lose any privileges by this? Like, why was that his approach? Why did he care to ask Yoda his opinion? Why did he not respect that Yoda, like, low-key was like, oh, this kid's bad news? I mean, he said his future is unclear, but that should be a pretty good indicator that stuff was going to go sideways.
So Qui-Gon, when you go back to, like, the extended stuff in a little bit, and the stuff you find out in the books and the video games and whatnot, Qui-Gon is close to what you would call a gray Jedi. So you have the light side and the dark side. And then there are people who kind of exist in the middle that go, you can't have absolutes. And both the light side and the dark side are absolutes. There has to be some gray and some wiggle room. And Qui-Gon kind of operates in the middle a little bit. And he is supposed to be a little bit more impulsive. I think there was a line of dialogue in this, or maybe it's in another movie, where they say if Qui-Gon wasn't so impulsive and exactly what you said, he would actually be, like, on the council.
Well, now he's gone and ruined it for everyone.
Well, and he ends up being more powerful, so he is actually the first person to become a Force ghost. We don't see it, but in Revenge of the Sith, Yoda goes, dude, to Obi-Wan, he goes, dude, your boy Qui-Gon, he figured out how to come back as a Force ghost. Like, that's pretty tight. We didn't know we could do that.
Yeah.
So Qui-Gon's, like, a super powerful dude. The thing that I want to bring up is, I think the biggest issue with this movie is there's so many things, like the pod race, that amount to nothing. They weren't important. They didn't move the plot forward in any kind of obvious... I mean, in an obvious way, yes, but almost everything in this movie could have been avoided, and there's no real protagonist that moves this story forward. And I think that's the biggest thing, is when you have a movie, you need to have that driving force, the main person doing that. And if you look at... When you look at all the Star Wars films, they are obviously ensemble films, even going back to the original trilogy, but it's very obvious that Luke is the main protagonist, the one that's driving the overall plot forward. Mm-hmm. If you look at the newer movies, same thing, ensemble film, but it's Daisy Ridley's character, Rey, who's really driving the plot forward. And if you look at this trilogy as a whole, it's Anakin, but if you look at this particular movie, who would you say is the main character of the film?
It's also muddy, and it's hard to tell what the point of this film is. It's also hard to tell, I mean, obviously I don't have this option, but if I were someone just coming to watch the films for the first time, had not seen anything, and was watching this as the starting point of this story, I would have no idea what's going on.
You wouldn't, and that's a big issue with this trilogy in general is, yeah, of course you want to see Darth Vader, how he became Darth Vader, but what people really wanted to see was Darth Vader already being evil, kicking all kinds of ass.
It's
which
bad
we never
storytelling. I would have been way more interested in seeing a slightly older Anakin, maybe like 12 or 13, who's really more exploring the areas of light and dark within himself and making these decisions. And
what you get in the second two
Hayden
movies.
Christensen just was not good either.
So just to hit on that protagonist thing really quick, like the obvious idea would be Qui-Gon Jinn, but he doesn't succeed in anything he set out to do in this movie. He very early says there's some sort of mystery going on. There's some kind of shadow player, but he never figures it out. He never sees who this is. He wants to get Anakin set up for training, but he does not succeed in that.
It's like all he senses is the gravity.
Right.
But he can't really tell which way it goes because he himself is living in that gray area. And I think that should have been fleshed out a little bit more, or maybe like we lost that in the edit. But I think that would have made this a much more interesting story, that we get to see him stress the importance of this feeling that he has, this gut feeling that he has about this kid. And then he eventually realizes that he's made a huge mistake, and get to see that arc. But we don't really see that.
And maybe he dies before that happens.
They just snuff him out.
Right. Because that could have been interesting. Exactly. He sees something. Maybe Anakin does one weird thing at the end of the movie, and Obi-Wan sees it. Not Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon sees it and goes, oh, maybe Yoda's right, but dies before he's able to tell Obi-Wan not to train him.
Right.
That could have been interesting. And then that brings me to Obi-Wan. As much as I like Ewan McGregor in this role, he has no agency in this film.
No.
He doesn't have any motives. He doesn't have any drives. He's just literally doing what Qui-Gon tells him to do the whole movie.
He's a sidekick.
Yeah, and then till the end when he kills Darth Maul. And So, I mean, obviously Anakin's not the main character in this film. It's not Natalie Portman. There is no driving force. Everything kind of happens by accident, including them winning the battle. Jar Jar Binks just accidentally destroys a bunch of tanks by fumbling a grenade into, a port. And then Anakin just, like, asks R2-D2 to turn off the autopilot, and he's just like, let me try to do a barrel roll. And then, like, barrel rolls into the ship, happens to crash the ship into the hangar safely, and then accidentally shoots a missile at the generator, and the generator blows up the whole space station.
Yeah.
Like, nothing is done on purpose. And then the arguably, you mentioned the pod race. Great scene. Super cool scene. Was it necessary?
Not really.
Not really.
It didn't really do anything except waste everyone's money.
The whole point of it was supposed to be, if Anakin won, they get the parts for the ship, and then also he gets to be freed. But the thing is, they mention very early on, being on Tatooine, that this planet is on the Outer Rims, but is still technically part of the Galaxy Senate or whatever, right? And they mention that slavery is illegal. So the Jedi have the moral high ground. They could literally have just done whatever they needed to do to get the parts. They have the Queen. They have all these things that are more important than this shop owner who is super sleazy, owns people. They could have stolen the parts and stolen Anakin and his mom,
right?
And had the moral high ground.
They leave his mom there to die.
Yeah, they have the moral high ground, taking these two people and getting them out from slavery.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of slavery, now obviously I will never know what that's like, but it doesn't seem like they had it that bad, because he was able to own a pod racer on his own and build a robot or a droid.
I think that they set that up to show us that despite their situation, he's still intelligent enough to find the things that he needs to build these incredible machines, which doesn't really come much into play later in the character's overall arc.
The only thing that comes into play is that he has fast reflexes because of the midichlorians, and that he's a good pilot.
Right.
That's about it. But what I'm getting at is, it seems more like indentured servitude versus slavery, because they mentioned that they moved there. And then also, they're allowed, if they were truly slaves, you think Watto would just take that pod racer as his own.
Yeah. It just, this whole world doesn't make a ton of sense. Also, it kind of looks like the whole region is impoverished. It's a lot of working class people and
moisture farmers
and slaves. And yet somehow all those people are able to come together and generate enough of an economy for a massive sports racing arena.
For NASCAR. Hey, well, that makes sense.
Basically.
Poor people in America like NASCAR.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I feel like there isn't anything about this film that when you really sit down and examine it, it still makes sense.
I really like the fight at the end with Darth Maul.
Yeah, that's
great. That's an
great.
incredible scene, and the music in that scene. So that's the other thing that we got a lot of comments on that I didn't really bring up, but the Duel of Fates, which is the song, or I guess the piece at the end of that fight. It's so good with the chanting and how it just starts ramping up. I like the pacing where it's explained outside of the movie in the script, but when they're going down that hallway where the shields pop up and then they shut off and they just have to keep stopping the battle while they wait, and there's just that tension of like, I'm gonna kill you as soon as the shield ball comes down. It's a great fight, and Darth Maul's taken on both of them fairly easily,
right? And he's like a panther pacing back and forth like he's gonna eat them.
Yeah,
he's a genuinely terrifying villain, and because he's so animalistic and beyond reason, almost like he's like been programmed to be this killing machine.
Right.
He is terrifying,
and that's why it is disappointing that Obi-Wan is able to do that little like jump from the vent, force the lightsaber to him, turn it on, and cut him in half quicker than he's able to react. And we're not saying anything original here, but when you go fast forward to the third movie, Obi-Wan is standing on a slight hill and says, I have the high ground. Like, don't even do it, you dummy. And then Anakin tries to flip over him, and he gets his legs cut off and his arm cut off. Like,
flippy flip.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. But that fight's great. And the actor who played Darth Maul physically was Ray Park, who does a ton of martial arts stuff like this. He did the Headless Horseman, but the voice was Christopher Walken. He did this. The voice was Peter Serafinowicz. I think that's how you say his name.
Does this guy just have a terrible voice?
Oh, he has a terrible voice. He was Snake Eyes, which is a non-speaking G.I. Joe character.
Oh, the poor guy.
And then he was Toad in the X-Men, and he has a slight role in that, and he has like a Cockney accent. But he's an amazing martial artist.
Yeah.
An amazing physical actor. He's up there, and I think, with like Doug Jones.
It's like the best creature actor on the block.
He's great. But yeah, the character was set up to be this great villain. And I think they did him better than they did Boba Fett. Because Boba Fett, he was set up in Empire Strikes Back, and he looks super cool with his armor. And then he just dies like a little pansy by a blind Han Solo in Return of the Jedi.
I always just had a hard time investing emotionally in Jango Fett and Boba Fett. It's just hard when they don't have a face most of the time.
Yeah, but those helmets are cool. The Mandalorian armor is cool.
It's cool, but yeah.
Mandalorian on Disney Plus is incredible. Just so you know. I love it. Anyway, was there anything you liked about this movie besides the pod race?
I mean, that fight scene towards the end was great. And I do feel like the pod race and that big fight scene were the things that saved the film, that made it worth watching. And I'm still even on the fence over whether or not this film is worth watching. It's not a good film. It's not. But those scenes were so well done, and they just threw so much money at them.
Right.
That they had to be good.
So the thing about this movie that's insane is, going back and watching this, I expected the green screen and the special effects to be terrible. And there are parts where it's not great, like the massive battle between the Gungans and the battle robots, or the battle droids.
It's like it needs a bit more rendering.
Right. It looks like a Windows 98 kind of screensaver at certain points. But what I was surprised at is, for this whole movie being on green screen, it looked really good. And in fact, they only built sets physically as tall as the actors. So after they cast Liam Neeson, they actually had to spend a couple $100,000 to extend the sets because he's 6'4". Yeah, he's massive. So they had to go and do that, which I thought was impressive. But overall, I thought the special effects were really good. The space battle I thought looked really good. The planets themselves looked really good. Most of the CGI characters didn't look great. Jar Jar looked okay. Jabba the Hutt did not look good.
Oh, Jar Jar. Can we talk about Jar Jar?
Let's talk about Jar Jar.
I understand why he is such a hated character.
He is very annoying. He was the first fully CG character in a movie, though. That was a main character.
He's so irritating, and at the same time borderline racist.
There's a lot of racist stuff in this movie. The Trade Federation is very obviously Asian.
Okay, yeah. Why are most of the villains Eastern in some way? They sound Eastern European or Asian, and I don't really understand why. Why does Anakin have a different accent than his mom? What is going on here? It just doesn't make sense. That
can almost make sense because they mentioned that the mom they'd only been on Tatooine for 3 or 4 years or something like that. So Anakin as a child is Tatooine has a very diverse culture, lots of aliens, lots of humans. He grew up speaking with a bunch of different people, so it kind of makes sense that his dialect would be a little different than his mom's. I can buy that.
I guess. Yeah, it's the accents are troubling, and it's just so distracting anytime you're watching a scene. And these creatures are making sounds that the shapes of their mouths cannot make. I do not understand why they made the choices that they did with the masks, why they made the choices that they did with the accents, why they made any of those choices with any of the things that are not human, I guess. Are Jedis human, really? Or are they Jedi?
No, they're human. So Jedi is a borderline religion kind of thing.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Humans with space bacteria.
But Jedis aren't all human, because you look at Yoda, and then there are a few of the other aliens in that
Are
room.
we ever going to find out what Yoda is?
No. So that's the thing that's interesting about this whole baby Yoda thing with The Mandalorian is, if you look at, there used to be books and comic books and everything was canon. And then when Disney bought it, they're the only things that are canon are the movies, Clone Wars, that cartoon, and then Star Wars Rebels. and then everything else is not.
It's so weird that they're going to die on that hill with Clone Wars.
No, well, the Clone Wars cartoon.
Yeah.
It was a good cartoon. Like, people really liked it, and it took place during this trilogy, so it kind of made sense to work out. There's only been like 3 of these Yoda creatures and all of that. So there was one in an old video game like Knights of the Old Republic, and then you see the other one in this movie. You see her in her name is Yaddle. She's in the council. So there's like 2 Yoda-like creatures, and that old one from the video game doesn't count anymore, so now we have Baby Yoda. So there's technically 3 in the known universe, and we don't know anything about them, like what their race is called or anything like that. So maybe with The Mandalorian we'll find out a little bit more about Yodas.
Yeah, the creatures bug me. I had a really hard time watching the scenes where you just see their stupid little mouths are straight slits that open and flap shut, and yet they're making O sounds. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, you can't get mad at that one because people like puppets and stuff like that. Like, it still is better to have a puppet like that than to have like a CG creature that doesn't look good. I would much rather have a puppet that's mouth just kind of flaps to the words versus a really bad CG creature.
I think that when you couple it with the accents, just kind of feels like bad kung fu dubbing.
Yeah.
And
or
that's
like a
why
Toho film.
Yeah, it's distracting. It's completely distracting. Even, I mean, and of course Natalie Portman was very young when she did this, but
18.
she was already extremely established, and she was a pretty big star already at this point. And she made some interesting vocal choices as well. And I think she was really trying to differentiate between her personal life and her interactions with Anakin when she has her guard down or when she's kind of going incognito, and then her formal voice. But it didn't work. And I know part of it is because they digitally altered it as well. But yeah, not strong vocal work from anyone involved in this film. And that's very strange.
Yeah, I agree with you. Do you want to just get a few trivia points out of this movie?
Sure.
So, during filming, Ewan McGregor would always make the lightsaber noises, and they'd always have to stop because you would get carried away. The other thing about this movie was that Star Wars, even under Disney, they're very secretive, obviously, for obvious reasons. And they actually throw their weight around with these movies. So, there was a Canadian theater who played this trailer like a week early. They were not allowed to play the movie.
Oof.
And that's happened. Disney is still currently doing that. In fact, Quentin Tarantino hates Star Wars films because when Hateful Eight came out a few years ago, that was going up against The Last Jedi. So there were movies theaters that he had contracts with, and Disney basically said, if you don't put Star Wars in X amount of theaters, we're not going to let you have it. So they had to make a choice between playing Star Wars and living up to their contract with Quentin Tarantino for Hateful Eight. So they bumped Hateful Eight out of theaters. So, like, they've always thrown Star Wars weight around to kind of bully theaters into submission.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I thought
it
was
is kind of
interesting.
satisfying to see Quentin Tarantino pissed off, though.
Yeah.
He sort of deserves it.
Other than that, yeah, those are the big ones that I had. There are a couple fan theories about this movie that have come into place lately. So in the pod race scene, there's a point where the Tusken Raiders are like shooting at them, and Anakin gets shot at like twice during this race. So there's a theory that because time travel is now canon in Star Wars because of the finale of Star Wars Rebels.
Every time you say canon, I just want to punch a white teenage boy in the face.
Well, that's a weird way to feel about this because it literally is what it's called. But time travel does exist in the Star Wars universe now. So a lot of people think that the Tusken Raiders are time travelers from the future because Anakin killed like hundreds of Tusken Raiders in like the second movie. So a lot of people think that they use time travel to come back and try to kill young Anakin like Terminator style. And the other theory that's come up recently is they think that Rey is actually Anakin's mom and went back in time and was impregnated by like Senator Palpatine through the Force because they mentioned that it's an immaculate conception kind of thing.
George Lucas loves to do weird things.
Well,
with
this
women.
wouldn't be George Lucas at this point. This is now Disney. But some people think that Daisy Ridley's character Rey is actually Anakin's mom out of time. I don't think that's the case, but
interesting.
That is a theory that's out there now.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would honestly enjoy Star Wars a lot more if the fans weren't such petulant little turds about everything. They really are, and it just kind of sucks the joy out of it, because you watch this movie and you're like, this is what people are so crazed over? Like, they're silly,
but they're crazed over
fun.
the original films, not this, and
right.
that's the thing.
They're immersive, and they do have really great things to offer, but when you start taking them as seriously as Star Wars fans do, it just sucks all of the joy out of them.
And I do agree with you on that. Like, I'm a big Star Wars fan. I go and see all these movies. I played most of the video games. I dressed up as Luke Skywalker for Halloween 3 years in a row. I was a huge Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. But you do have to go into these movies with certain expectations.
If you're okay with... If you like the creatures, you like the fantasy, you like the otherworldliness, and you can get past the terrible acting,
you just need to go in...
weird writing.
You just need to go in wanting to have fun. Just like the Marvel movies. The Marvel movies are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they're fun. And as a comic book fan and a Spider-Man fan, if I went in and wanted to nitpick everything, it would be really easy to do that.
Right.
But that's not what I'm going to. I'm going because I want to see my favorite character on the screen. Mm-hmm. And I have to realize this is a different medium, and it's not the same as the comic book, and it's not going to be the same as the trilogy that came out in the 70s and the 80s. So that, I do agree with you. People get really nitpicky, specifically around like The Force Awakens. People loved that movie when it came out.
Right.
And then shortly after, people were like, oh, it was too similar to A New Hope. So then with The Last Jedi, which you haven't seen, they make some really big swings. Some of them are misses. Some of them I liked. But people are like, it's too different. Like, you're right. You can't please everyone.
So what is it they want?
They want The Mandalorian. Like, that's universally loved.
Mm-hmm.
And that new video game with Cameron Monaghan, people apparently really, really like that. Like, nobody's really bashing that game. So, at least the story-wise. So, that you can't...
Except for when Cameron freaked out about them getting rid of his red hair with a mod.
Yeah, well, gingers don't have souls.
Come on.
You could take that to the bank, Cameron Monaghan.
He is.
Yeah, he definitely got paid for that. So I think I know where you stand on the film, but we should have the conversation. I honestly was pleasantly surprised by the film. I went in expecting to hate this because
I went in expecting to enjoy it.
See, I went in expecting to hate it. So I remember loving it the first time I saw it, and then very quickly, by the time I got into high school and started working at the movie theater and seeing a lot more films, because as a kid I didn't see a lot of movies in the theater. We go see maybe one or two a year. But by the time I got to the movie theater working there, I would see a lot more, and I realized this was not a good movie.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've watched this movie since probably 2006.
Wow.
Yeah, 2006 when Revenge of the Sith came out. I went and watched the other two again.
I watched them a lot with my godson.
I watched the Attack of the Clones, which I think is the worst one, and Revenge of the Sith a lot more than I watched this one. And that's largely because I think Natalie Portman was way hotter in those movies, and I was really into Natalie Portman when I was in like high school. I went in thinking this was going to be god-awful, and it's not good, but I actually enjoyed little bits of this film, like the parts we talked about. Actually, we didn't really talk about the beginning of the movie. I actually really enjoyed when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were kind of infiltrating.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to gas them in that room, so they go through the ventilation shaft. And I think what this whole trilogy did better than the original trilogy was showing that Jedis are badasses.
Mm-hmm.
So they they go through and they do their little flippy flips as they're jumping through the vents, and then they drop down. They fight, dozens of droids, and they make it look easy. There's points where, there's only one droid left where they kind of weren't paying attention. Then Obi-Wan just kind of turns and like force pushes them away, like with no effort whatsoever. And I think this movie, you do get a sense that the Jedi are these really powerful priest warriors that you don't really see with Alec Guinness in the first two Star Wars films. And then even with Luke in Return of the Jedi, yeah, he takes on a bunch of people, but I don't think he was as cool as Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan at the beginning of this film.
Well, and I think part of that was actually something that I did enjoy about the film. I liked their rapport, their dynamic, their chumminess, and how in sync they were with each other. That was very entertaining to watch those characters be that way.
I agree.
When before, with the original trilogy, so much of what we saw from a Jedi was just very stoic almost.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just all seriousness. And like this shows that, there is fun in being a Jedi. And that I think is part of Qui-Gon because he's in that, morally gray area.
You get a sense of why they do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Which I enjoyed.
So I do like that aspect. So I pleasantly was surprised. Like, I'd say I enjoy this more than I remember enjoying it as at least a teenager.
And I went in kind of excited to watch it and then hated it.
So there we go. We're kind of split on this one. We don't come up split that often.
Yeah, but we were both wrong, which is fun.
Yeah, I agree. We both went in and got different things about it. Like, I actually have more of an appreciation for this film now.
Yeah. And I'm sure that anyone who's listening to this is probably a Star Wars fan and they just hate everything that I had to say, which is totally fine.
But I'm sure there are a lot of people who agree with everything you said.
Maybe.
I honestly don't. There's not a single thing that we said on this podcast tonight that was original.
Right.
Everything has been said about this.
But see, I can even take my favorite films and say, objectively, this is a steaming turd of a picture, and I love it.
And we've done that several times on this show. Like, we know objectively it's a bad, but there's a warm place in our heart.
Yeah, this just kind of completely ruined this movie for me.
I actually really enjoyed it, and now I think I was not planning on going through and watching all the Star Wars films before the episode 9 Rise of Skywalker. I don't think I'll get through all of them, but I think I might finish off the prequels, and then I'll watch. I don't think I'll get to the original trilogy before, but I'm definitely going to go through and watch all the Star Wars movies over the next couple months.
Yeah, I think I do want to watch the rest of them. I think this film can officially be just buried for me. I can watch like the first 15 minutes and then like the last
45,
maybe half hour. Yeah, half hour, and that's all I really need from this film.
So we did this film because obviously Star Wars is coming out, but it's December. We definitely should do a Christmas film. What are we going to be doing for our Christmas special this year?
It's A Wonderful Life.
Classic.
Depressingly
classic.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to Ruin My Childhood. Check out our other great podcast, Remake Rewind. You can check out everything that's MDXpods related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at MDXpods. If you want to support the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/MDXpods. And check out Katrina's YouTube at Katrina Ossity on YouTube.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.